These trees probably won't be around in a decade. The emerald ash borer is in Nebraska, and it's going to kill a lot of ash trees. How our cities and towns will deal with the multi-million-dollar cost of this tiny bug, coming up on Speaking of Nebraska. Welcome to our new NET News discussion program, Speaking of Nebraska. I'm Mike Tobias. Each week for the next 8 weeks, we're going to talk about important issues that matter to you and to our state. We'll also look at what's happening in state government and share a bit of Nebraska history. So you've probably heard about the emerald ash borer. It's killed ash trees in the United States for a couple decades. Now it's here, and our communities are wondering how they're going to deal with this expensive problem. For years, a massive ash tree shaded the south edge of the city of Plattsmouth's Oak Hill Cemetery. The tree was old, but healthy. The city needed to cut it down anyway. Better sooner than later. It was encroaching on headstones, and because it's an ash tree, it was likely going to die soon anyway. So will 100 other ash trees on city property like the cemetery and parks and right-of-ways. And countless more on private property, all because of the emerald ash borer. Plattsmouth's city budget includes a few $1,000s a year for trees, but it may cost the city a couple $1,000s to remove and replace each ash tree. Regardless of cost, dead and dying ash trees have to be removed. It's a liability issue.
Once we are aware of a tree on public property that's dead or dangerous, we've got an obligation to take it out, because if it falls and hits somebody, then or hurts somebody or damages property, that's our responsibility.
Portis could ask for more tree money in the Plattsmouth budget, but dealing with EAB doesn't mean other needs go away.
We need to buy some new stretchers that will range between $15,000 and $20,000, depending on what you need. Which is more important, taking the trees out or buying those stretchers, buying a police car, taking the trees out? Those are the kinds of choices that have to be made in a small community and in a large community.
Portis told his story at a legislative hearing for a bill that would provide $3 million a year to help cities and towns pay for ash tree removal, disposal, and replanting.
With all factors involved in a natural disaster of this magnitude, it is estimated to cost the city of Omaha around $19 million. Another challenge that we face is the overwhelming amount of private property-owned trees that our code enforcement inspectors will need to deal with. Thousands of additional tree complaints will be added on top of the already 13,000 complaints they get annually. This is another huge safety concern that we will be dealing with, since some homeowners will not be able to afford the cost of a removal.
I've had the opportunity to talk with many community leaders around Nebraska, and I always ask about their readiness for the impact of EAB. Overwhelmingly, the answer has been they're doing very little or even nothing to prepare for the invasion. And these are mostly smaller communities. I grew up in Cass County, so I'm asking some of those folks. And when I ask why nothing's been done, the answer is always funding. They tell me it's hard enough to find money to fix potholes, let alone fund the removal and replacement of hundreds of trees.
The old ash tree in the cemetery is now gone. A scene that will be repeated throughout Plattsmouth in the coming years, at a cost.
So we'll spend probably a couple $1,000s taking that tree down, and then more money trying to establish it. Multiply that by 100 or more trees. You know, for a small town, that's a lot of money.
Well, let's talk more about the impact of the emerald ash borer with Scott Josiah and Eric Berg from the Nebraska Forest Service. Thanks for joining us. This has obviously been the dominant topic in your office, I imagine, for the last few years. Scott, let's go back and talk a little bit about emerald ash borer history. When did this start in the United States, and how did it get here?
Well, the emerald ash borer is an exotic insect from China that was imported in pallet wood to Detroit and perhaps several other cities in the late 1990s, and it was found in 2002 in Detroit, and since then has spread to about 28 other states, essentially half of North America, in just a short period of time. So North America is facing the eradication of pretty much all of its ash species of trees. It's a big deal. This is much bigger in terms of scale and scope than Dutch elm disease was in the 1960s and 70s.
Which wiped out our entire Dutch elm tree population.
Pretty much in our communities,
at that point.
exactly, yes.
And and so it hit places like Michigan and Ohio and Indiana a lot earlier. And so we can learn something from that. And we've got a couple of pictures we're going to throw up of a street in Detroit that you guys provided that really shows what the impact's like. The one on the top is from 2006. The one on the bottom is from 2009. Same time of year, and you can really see live ash trees on the top, entire street of dead ash trees on the bottom.
Pretty significant, isn't it? Yeah, and that happens in a very short period of time, Mike, and that's what we're trying to educate people on. This isn't something that occurs over a couple weeks, a couple years. It happens very quickly and makes a dramatic impact in people's lives, the communities, the benefits that we enjoy and are derived from trees. So it's very significant.
So what can we learn, having, I guess, if you'd call it an advantage of having these other states have to deal with this earlier? What can we learn from that?
Well, one thing we can learn is we need to be proactive. We know this is coming. This is a slow-moving disaster that's about to hit Nebraska. It's not like a tornado or a windstorm or a snow event. This is we know it's happening. We know it's going to happen. We cannot prevent it from really happening on a large scale. So we can be prepared for that in lots of ways. We can start proactively removing older, declining ash trees. We can remove younger ash trees that have not yet gotten very expensive to remove.
And that's some things that maybe didn't happen when you look at how some of the other states that didn't have that advantage of knowing maybe weren't able to prepare as well as we are.
Right, and they learned as they went, and we have learned from them. And we saw states in early 2000, 2002 that tried eradication. They tried to treat all of their trees. They tried to manage them various ways. And every case we learn more and more from that. And so we're really in a good position to see what has worked. And Scott's absolutely right. Being proactive with this, removing those trees before it gets here, and targeting the trees that are already dead or dying or are a conflict with utilities can and should be removed.
Yeah, so we'll talk a little more about some of those strategies a little bit later, but when we look again at how quickly it moved through some of the other parts of the state, and again, that picture of just how dramatic that, we're going to see that same thing in Nebraska.
We are, absolutely. And we've got neighborhoods in Lincoln, for example, where it's 100% ash. And all of a sudden, a neighborhood that was established in the 60s with canopied over street trees, they'll all be gone in a couple years. And we'll see that throughout the state as EAB moves across the state.
Yeah, and the reason we have those neighborhoods that are 100% ash is ironically that reaction to Dutch elm disease back in the 60s, correct?
That's exactly right. Green ash and other species of ash trees are native to Nebraska and to the broader United States, and they're really adapted to our pretty difficult conditions. And so they were the species of choice. After we lost a lot of elms, essentially ash was overplanted, way overplanted. And so you see whole communities or whole streets that are 100% ash, as Eric has mentioned. And there will be not only a financial impact to this, but there will be an emotional impact to this. People in Nebraska love their trees. They really connect with their trees. And so when they lose whole streets of trees, that affects them emotionally. They feel that actually there's some research out of Illinois that shows that it affects their health as well. So there are some significant impacts beyond just the financial impacts.
And officially it is in Nebraska. Last summer we had the first observation, I guess, of the emerald ash borer, and it's in. So talk a little bit about where it is now in the state.
Yeah, right now the two confirmed areas are in Omaha and Greenwood. We've looked quite extensively throughout the state, especially in Lincoln. We have not found any confirmations yet. That doesn't mean it's not here. Those are just confirmed findings. That's really important to point out. And we try to educate people that the probability is just as good that it's in Scotts Bluff, for example, because it's been confirmed in Boulder, Colorado, as it could be in Grand Island. So we have to be very cognizant that it is in places we don't know yet.
Because you don't actually, it takes a while before you can even see the signs of it being in an area, correct?
Exactly. It's, you know, it's a very small insect, and it occupies the upper canopy for a number of years in low populations. And we don't see any damage, we don't see the insects at all during that period of time. But then all of a sudden, around year 5 or 6 after the infestation, it explodes in terms of populations. And that's when you start to see mortality, not only in the trees affected, but a massive spread to other trees. And it's that exponential, dramatic increase in populations that catch communities and homeowners off guard, because if they're reacting when the insects are finally detected, they're behind the curve, because most of the mortality occurs from the time of detection for about the next 8 years, and then most of your trees are dead. Yeah. Most of your ash trees are dead.
And when you talk about some of the numbers of ash trees that we can expect to lose in Nebraska, those numbers are astounding.
They are, yeah, 1 million ash trees just in communities alone. And we look at places like Omaha, Lincoln, 14,000, 10,000, and those are just public trees. And what we've seen from our community inventories is that for every public tree, there's 3 to 4 more ash trees that are on private property. So it's going to be a very significant issue and a problem.
I think I've seen a number of something along the lines of 250,000 trees that are on public property. So we're talking about, as we saw in Plattsmouth, a cemetery. We're talking about city parks, rights of way, golf courses, things of that. So 250,000 public trees, roughly 256,000. Mm-hmm. That's what
Exactly.
we're talking about.
Yeah.
So part of what we wanted to talk about is just then the challenge of these communities dealing with that, those public trees, that they have to have a budget for removal and replacement and disposal. The price tag that you've estimated for that, for the overall for the communities in the state, is?
Close to $1 billion, just for community trees, and there's 42 million other ash trees in our forests that we won't be able to deal with. So just for our communities, it's about $1 billion.
And again, that cost is in the 3 things that I talked about?
It's for removal, disposal, and replacement of those trees. And what often happens is it exhausts the community's budgets for municipal trees, for public trees. It exhausts the budgets very quickly, and so they never get around to replanting. At least that's one of the lessons that have been learned from other states. Places that did not prepare and did not adequately support their budgets, they started pulling money from other social support programs just to pay for the removal and disposal of the trees, and never had any more money for replacement. So it's a permanent reduction in the cover of your tree canopy in your communities, which has all sorts of implications.
So as you're out talking to different communities, whether it's city administrators, city foresters around the state, what are they telling you in terms of how they plan to come up with the money or deal with this?
Yeah, that's a great question. Answers are all across the board, and the most common answer is we're not sure what we're going to do because it's an overwhelming issue. Thankfully, most communities are starting to get a handle on their ash resource, which is one of the recommendations. How many trees, what condition are they, where are they located at, and then what are you going to do with them? And so then they start to proactively target the removal, which is most of them are doing. We recommend they do that. But what do they do for disposal? Because it's not wood waste, it's wood opportunity. And so we're trying to get people to think about how they can use that for a better good. And what are we going to do to replace those areas where we've lost all the canopy? And they don't know what they're going to do yet for the most part.
Getting into the use of it, can you use it for mulch? Can you use it for firewood? Is there still a risk?
Go ahead.
Well, it has lots of uses. I mean, it's a beautiful wood. The problem is that urban trees generally are not suitable for large pieces of lumber and things like that. It's great mulch, it's great firewood, but that's how it's spread, is by firewood, so we don't really encourage a lot of use and transport of firewood for sure. It's just a lot of wood all at once, and so that's the issue, is how to deal with all this wood all at once.
Right. And you think this will play out over a period of what, 10 to 15 years, roughly?
You know, that's a great question as well, and it's really hard to say. It's going to be decades, and it'll be hard to say when there's a real clear finish to this, because there'll continue to be some ash and some EAB that's maintained. But we're going to see very significant changes in our canopy in places like Lincoln and Omaha in the next 10 to 15 years.
Another issue that we've heard, as we heard reporters from Plattsmouth talk about, is just that liability issue, because cities can't just ignore this. Right. There's a huge liability issue. I think they've seen in other places. I believe it was in Michigan, there was a decaying ash tree that fell and hit a school bus. Yeah. In Missouri, there was a decaying ash tree in a city park that fell and hit somebody in that park and caused an injury. So this is a significant liability issue that these towns are having to deal with.
Yeah, and one of the things that we've seen in other states that really catches communities off guard is the private trees. Take, for example, we know there's lots of very large ash trees that are in lower income neighborhoods and backyards. When those trees start to die from EAB, you can't just get in there and easily take them down because they're so brittle. So all of a sudden this becomes a huge liability issue for that property owner as well as all the adjacent property owners. And at some point the city needs to step in and try and help them manage that problem.
So it's almost twofold in the sense that there's the trees that the cities have to manage that are on city property, but also those private property trees that a homeowner for various reasons may or may not be able to have the means to take care of themselves.
Exactly, but it's still a public problem.
Yeah. So what about the money? I know there was some money in the legislature potentially to help provide some support to cities and towns. Are there other sources?
You know, we've applied for grants for Nebraska Environmental Trust. Some of our partners have as well. We've had past partnerships with the Department of Roads that have helped with right-of-way plantings within communities that have been extremely beneficial. But right now, kind of the theme that we're hearing is this is such a large problem, we're not even sure how to address it, and the monies that we might have are so insignificant, we're not sure if it'll really make a difference. So it's a large challenge.
So I think one of the solutions to that, or at least a partial solution to that, is to encourage everyone to start planting trees, and that's homeowners, and to start planting trees now. This is, again, the tree planter state, the home of Arbor Day. We love our trees, we're proud of our trees, and that is one solution, to start planting. If everybody started planting trees, 1 or 2 a year, every single homeowner in the state, all of a sudden we'd have this problem licked in no time. To harness the tree planting abilities of everyone in the state. We love our trees, they're important to us, and each tree can really make a difference. When you start aggregating those and adding those all up, a couple 100,000 trees a year in a community can make a huge, gigantic difference and basically replace all of those trees.
Well, and I think, again, it gets back to the lessons learned from a few decades ago, but I think we're a little more proactive in terms of what we're planting, correct?
We hope so. You know, we saw past generations make this mistake with Dutch elm disease, and we did it planting a lot of ash, and now we have the opportunity to fix this time. We know what to do. We know that a species palette that's very diverse is going to be the long-term answer for generational impacts. And I could name 5 species right off the top of my head, things like bur oak, catalpa, Kentucky coffee tree, hackberry, and so on, that if we all went out and focused on those, it would make a huge difference in our urban canopy.
Yeah. So talk a little bit about the concept of treating. First of all, you can't really do anything to kill the ash borer. Well, or can you? You
can kill the individual bug. The chemistry behind treatment is very, very effective, but it doesn't control the population per se. Eventually those trees will be lost. And so we're not even trying to use chemistry to maintain and treat these trees and maintain the canopy long term. But you might want to add some to that as well, Scott.
It kind of depends on who's paying the bill. If it's a municipality, then it's in the best interest of that municipality or city or town to use some treatments, perhaps treat a fair number of their ash trees to spread out the mortality so that it costs them less per year, and then they can cash flow those costs over a longer period of time.
And then real briefly, advice for homeowners. Should they be taking trees out? We've just got about 30 seconds left.
Sure.
Should they take trees out in advance? What should they do?
If they've got a poor condition ash tree, definitely they should think about taking it out and replanting right away. If they've got a high condition ash tree, it's in a good location, providing a lot of shade, get an arborist over there, have them look at that tree, and treatment is a good long-term solution for them.
Okay, and we're going to add a web address to our website, netnebraska.org/speakingofnebraska, that will help direct people for a little more advice. Scott Josiah, Eric Berg from the Nebraska Forest Service, thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you. Each week, we'll talk about other stories and projects NET News is working on. The big one this week is Bill Kelly's new documentary, After Ebola, Nebraska and the Next Pandemic. Here's a preview.
It was always a what if. It might happen, it might never happen. The when will it happen? People realize it's a real reality. I mean, who would have thought that a person with Ebola would walk into a hospital in Nebraska? It could happen anywhere, at any time. I was standing at the bottom of the stairs looking up, and the patient, came to the door of the aircraft. And I just remember thinking, why am I here? I did not have to be the one doing this. As the patient came down the stairs and we got him onto the gurney, that's what he became. He became my patient. I'm a nurse, I'm going to take care of him, and that's what it was. It was definitely different from anything I'd ever experienced before. I didn't feel like I was being brave or anything like that. I was just this patient's nurse.
The most contagious and deadly diseases in the world can show up anywhere, including Nebraska. Are we ready for what comes after Ebola?
So there are lots of opportunities to watch After Ebola on NET television. Look for days and times at netnebraska.org/Ebola and check out all the fascinating extra videos on the site. A series of NET News signature stories from Bill Kelly's After Ebola project is also airing this week. One examines what the medical team learned from facing off with one of the deadliest diseases on the planet. Next week, there's a small but growing number of electric vehicles in Nebraska, so communities are building a network of charging stations, some in places you might not expect. Watch for Ariana Brocious' story Wednesday on NET Radio during Morning Edition and All Things Considered. You can also listen to or read all of our signature stories at netnebraska.org/news and connect with NET News and our journalists on Facebook and Twitter. Each week, we'll also dive into all things state government with a guy who spends a lot of time down at the Capitol this time of year, our state government reporter, Fred Knapp, who joins us now. Fred, first of all, we were talking about some of that funding for emerald ash borer removal and replacement. Talk a little bit about that bill and where it's at right now.
Well, that bill's going nowhere this year. It was sent to the Appropriations Committee, where it's kind of the Bermuda Triangle for new spending ideas this time of year, and that's a reflection of the fact that there's no money. The state faced a projected budget shortfall over the next 2 fiscal years of up to $1 billion. They've made some cuts already. It's now down to about $300 million, but there's no money for that program. And a concrete example of what that could mean, you know the block leading south from the Capitol,
Sure.
Goodhue Boulevard, that's 15th Street?
Right.
Those are all ash trees that line that first block. And so the city of Lincoln owns them. It's their jurisdiction. They could treat them, but as you heard, that's just a short-term solution.
Yeah.
And
so even the trees around the Capitol are going to be a sign of...
It'll be a very visible sign, yeah.
But that when we talk about an amount of money in the scope of the state's budget, $3 million isn't a lot, but that's a pretty good indication of just how crunched everything is this year.
Well, that's right. They're cutting just about everything or holding it flat. And so, like I said, for a new spending program, it's just not there.
Yeah. A lot of tax talk this week. One move to limit property taxes, another dealing with sales taxes for online purchases.
Right. Senator Mike Groney, the chairman of the Education Committee, proposed taking the existing property tax credit fund, which goes to every property tax payer in the state, and instead directing it at schools, which are the largest users of property tax. That would have been especially helpful in rural areas, but the urban senators weren't having it, so it's essentially dead for the year. The prospects for the sales tax on online purchases looked a little rosier than that initially. It passed the first round of debate with 28 votes. But last week, Attorney General Doug Peterson issued an opinion that said it's unconstitutional. That wasn't such a surprise. It was intended as a constitutional test anyway. But then Senator Ernie Chambers started asking questions about it, And that's never a good sign for a bill's prospects.
Yeah. There's also something called the Nebraska Taxpayer Reform Act that Governor Ricketts and others are pushing. Real briefly, tell us what that is.
Okay. There are two parts to that. One is an income tax reduction. For the personal side, it would lower the top rate from just under 7 to just under 6%. Corporate side, just under 8, goes down to just under 6. The property tax component of that is to limit ag land valuation increases to 3.5% a year. But ag groups say that doesn't do them any immediate good. It might help over the long run.
We're going to see discussion coming up on that. One of the big stories of the week was actually outside the chamber. That was the State Liquor Control Commission's decision to not relicense the 4 beer stores in Tiny White Clay that sell millions of cans of beer a year, mostly to the adjacent Indian reservation. So what happened and what's next?
Well, the decision hinged on the lack of law enforcement in White Clay. White Clay is this tiny place. Has no police force. The Sheridan County Sheriff's Office covers it, but the Sheridan County Sheriff's Office is 20 miles away in Rushville. It takes them a long time to get up there. And so the license was denied largely on those grounds. That decision is going to be appealed in court, and it'll be up to the judge. The current licenses expire April 30th. It'll be up to the judge whether they can keep operating beyond that while the appeals are pending.
Okay. Real briefly, what are the couple of things that you're going to be paying attention to next week?
Well, next week is going to be all budget all the time, essentially. They still have $300 million to go. There's a plan to fix that, including dipping further into the cash reserve. But then the Economic Forecasting Board meets again, I believe it's Wednesday, and they could lower the forecast further, and then there'd be more cutting to be done.
Okay, thanks, Fred. And you can remember that you can watch or catch during the legislative session Fred's state government coverage each afternoon on NET Radio and on our website, netnebraska.org/news. Well, Nebraska turns 150 years old this year, and a lot's happened during that time, and even before we became the 37th state. Each week, we'll bring you a bit of Nebraska history. This one might make you hungry.
Currently known as Blackstone Center and remodeled to hold office space, the Blackstone Hotel in Omaha was built in 1916 and landed on the National Register of Historic Places in 1985. In the 1920s, it was known nationwide as the premier hotel between Chicago and San Francisco along the Lincoln Highway. Some of the amenities included a fleet of limousines, its own magazine, ballroom, rooftop gardens, and award-winning restaurants. One of those restaurants gets credit for introducing butter brickle ice cream and arguably the first Reuben sandwich to the world. Thank you, Blackstone, for these delectable food inventions.
Well, that's all for this edition of Speaking of Nebraska. Next week, we'll talk about challenges and opportunities for Nebraska's rapidly growing Hispanic Latino population. Thanks for joining us. Good night.